welcome. Hello, everybody. How are y'all doing today? I know you're expecting Steve, somebody a lot taller, a lot better looking. But Steve is in Texas celebrating Sukkot, as they do every year. And a bunch of people have gone down to that. And there's Mr. Alec. Now, I just have to say, you realize you're getting old when you look at the back of the head of Alex Schlesinger Hall here. And I was like, is that my son? Like, he's gotten so much taller than I thought. But see, both of y'all stand up. I just want to see how tall, Okay. So it's close, but I was like, because they both got the same fade cut, and I was like, is that my son? I was like, okay, y'all can sit down. But yeah, so it was so cool, because I was just like, man, Samuel is getting so tall. Hey, have y'all ever had one of those mornings where, like you're going to teach and you're going to preach, and then you like crushed yourself all day yesterday painting, and you've got tons of physical injuries, and you're taking a nap downstairs, and you've canceled your middle school youth group downstairs, so they're running around outside maybe setting things on fire, and then you're just taking a nap, and then your daughter's in the middle school room, and she's upset because she didn't know middle school was canceled, and she's feeling really sick, and so then you look at her and you're like, I can take you home. And she's like, you have to preach. And I'm like, I got time. I can take you home. And so then you take her home, and then you come back, and then you find out that Chris May parked in your parking spot. And so then you're like, okay, I got to go down another street. I'm not sure what time Steve comes up, but I'm just like hoping they're not like, has anybody seen Chris? Has anybody seen Chris? And so it's all good, brother. It's all good. It's all good. Today we are going to jump in. Steve has been in the series on Mark, looking at the gospel. We're gonna stay in that, but we're gonna go all the way back to Genesis, and we're gonna look at this thing that I want to call like the primary relationship. And I want to tie in the primary relationship in how do we have a relationship with God? And how does that relationship overflow into everything that we do, everything that we see? How do we live? And so when we look at this, when we go all the way back to the garden, in Genesis 3:8, we get this picture of the garden. And Genesis 3:8 is like the moment of the fall. Everything is collapsing. Adam and Eve have hidden themselves, created covering for themselves, and then it, has this line as they're hiding from God, that God is walking through the garden in the cool of the day. And he's looking for Adam and Eve. Now, both you and I know, as we look at the story, God knows exactly where Adam and Eve are. He knows what's happened. But he's walking in the cool of the day. And so what I have to do is, because when we read the entire Genesis account, it's like a lot of business going on. There's creation, there's making of man, there's making of woman, there's giving job titles and assignments, and then we go right into chapter 3, the fall. And so what I have to do is I have to think like, okay, so if in Genesis 3:8, God is walking in the cool of the day, looking for his beloved children, this is not abnormal. This is normal. This is the primary relationship that Adam and Eve were experiencing with God. And so everybody just take can you imagine that? Just walking with God in his creation. You're his child. I think about like when my kids were young, and they are not young anymore. This one night when we lived in a Burlingame, and we lived in another unit, and our parking spot was really far away. And Ambler, my oldest, who's now gone off to college, is with me after a Sunday night service, and we're walking back. And it's dark. Like, Burlingame meets all the light requirements for the city of Aspen. The phase 1 is like a black hole in the middle. And then they built phase 2, and you're like, wow, they've got a lot of lights. And then they built phase 3, and it's like, wow, you can read a newspaper out there at night. But Burlingame 1 is like this black hole. And so we're walking, and Ambler just looked at me, and I was like, oh, do you want my cell phone flashlight? And she's like, no. I know that God's with us, and we have a great big God, which was a song. And so when I think about walking with God, I think about like Ambler walking with me that night. Like, she knows she's safe because she knows God. She knows she's safe because she's with me. And there's this relationship, and it's primary. Like I'm her father. She knows that she can look to me for anything. Now that she's at college, I have to remind her, I'm like, when you make those big decisions, you can still call me. I'm still your father, and I can help you and understand how to make some of those decisions. But there's this primary relationship that Adam and Eve are experiencing with God. Everything is perfect, even in the sense that sin has now entered the garden. God is still on his normal operating procedure of walking in the garden in the cool of the day, wanting to walk with his children, but they've hidden from him. And we are called to walk with God as a primary relationship. And so as we kind of dig in today, I want us to kind of think about this. And I'm gonna see what y'all can come up with. We've been teaching this in middle school for like the last 4 weeks on Wednesday nights, and I've been discussing this and diving in with the high school guys and girls at our home church on Sunday night. But everybody ever born, everybody ever created by God, Adam and Eve were in the same place, have 4 primary needs. So what are some of those primary needs? What's that? Okay, we got love. Okay. Security.
Protection.
What's that? Protection. Yep. Food. Who said food? I don't have my hearing aids on, so it's really hard to. Food. Okay. I'm going to give you a buzzer on that one. And that's what I do with my middle school and high school students, because, immediately they're like, food, shelter, water. I'm like, oh my gosh, y'all are so trained. Like, y'all know, the primary things, like if everything fell apart, how do you survive? We need food, we need shelter, we need water, and then I'm like, which order? Our 4 primary needs have very little to do with sustaining this, our flesh. We hang on to our flesh so dearly, like it's our body, it's our vessel that we live in. But our 4 primary needs are this: acceptance, identity, security, and purpose. All right, so does anybody disagree? We long to be accepted, right? Working with middle school kids, I'm always like, hey, it's rough. You're not at the beginning and you're not at the end, you're in the middle. And the middle can be rough. And I'm like, looking at middle school kids and just their need for acceptance, their learning who they are, their desire to know that security, everything's going to be all right. And then the big question, why am I here? Purpose. And so when you think about like Adam and Eve in the garden, walking in the cool of the day with God, all 4 of their primary needs were met every day. God said, I accept you. I'm walking with you. God's like, I'm giving you identity. You're Adam, you're Eve. Adam actually named Eve, but God created them. He gave them identity. God provides a sense of security for them. They're living in the garden. They're hanging out with lions that are not trying to ravage and eat them. They are given a purpose to expand the garden, to grow God's plan. And so when you think about it, it's like acceptance, identity, security, and purpose. When we boil it all down, every one of us longs for that. We long for acceptance. We want to be liked. And when I'm talking to my middle school friends, I'm like, even the kid who's the furthest out, who puts on the personification that he doesn't need anybody, doesn't want anybody, wants to be left alone, wears the hoodie full over all the time, is still longing for acceptance. And this becomes a very slippery slope for each of us. Now, I ran into these 4 primary needs through a search for marriage. And I came up with this book, and it's called Marriage on the Rock, when I first saw it, I thought it was Marriage on the Rocks. And I was like, well, that looks cool. Yeah, let's see, because I'm always looking for more information and another book to put into my Audible. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, this book is incredible. It's done by a guy named Jimmy Evans. And he's talking about marriage. And he's been a marriage counselor and a pastor for years. And he talks about chapter 1, the 4 primary needs that everybody has. And he's laying it out. And he comes to this conclusion at the end of chapter 1. If you are seeking for your spouse or anything else to meet your 4 primary needs other than God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, you will fail. You will fail. Like if you depend on your wife to give you acceptance, or if you depend on your husband to always give you acceptance, there's going to be a day where that acceptance doesn't come, and you're going to be like, oh, this does not compute. I think of a day many years ago when somebody cut the cell tower cable for Aspen, and everybody was walking around Aspen like, how do I pay to park? Like, I need to park. I need to pay. Are they still ticketing? Like, because all of us are on the app now. Like, you don't go to the little ticket machine and put in quarters. You go on the app and say, yeah, 2 hours, I'm eating lunch, But everybody, like, I was just walking around, and I parked at City Market, and you don't have to pay there. Because I was going to City Market, and I ran into somebody. It was your dad, and he was like, Chris, what do I do? Dan Sr. was like, I'm like, I wouldn't worry about it. Like, I don't think they're going to ticket because, there's no cell service in Aspen. And when we look anywhere else than God for acceptance, identity, security, and purpose, the place that's feeding us, at some point, the line's going to get cut. And we're going to be in trouble, and we're not going to know what to do. Something in our day is not going to feel right. And so we're going to look at these in this context. All right? Who can tell me what is required of us? And so when we think about us as people, what's required of us? Brooks, what's required of us? Smile. It's a good smile. Does anybody have an idea? Anybody want to take a stab? What's required of us?
To glorify God.
Okay, glorify God.
Follow His commandments.
Follow His commandments. Submit to His leadership. Yep. I mean, He's guiding us. He's directing us. There's this book in the Bible. It's called Micah. How many of y'all have read Micah? Like, grasp it. Like, Micah is a prophet of God. Micah has come to the divided nation Israel and is speaking that God's judgment is about to fall. It's not like the best message as a prophet. Like, you want to come and be like, God is so pleased with you. God is loving you. But Micah had to come with this message that God's judgment is coming. And he grinds it out through the whole book, and he mixes it with promises from God to redemption, to God's going to restore it. He's going to take his remnant people, and he's going to recreate his nation. The temple's going to be rebuilt after he's already told them like all this other bad stuff's going to happen because the nation Israel is divided and it's not following God. And then we get to this sweet, sweet spot of Micah 6:8, which asks us this. Micah 6:8, he says, He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. And so when I take that verse and I just want to boil it down, and make it as simple as I possibly can, I come up with walk humbly with your God. And that immediately takes me back to the garden. It takes me to walking in the cool of the day in God's perfect creation with my Creator. And it's incredible when you think about it that way. Like, walk humbly with your God. Yes, I get subject to His, commandments, follow His leadership, all of those. But if I walk humbly with my God in the cool of the day, if I walk humbly with my God every day of my life, well, I'm going to seek to keep His commandments. I'm going to seek to follow His leadership. I'm going to seek to go where He leads me. And so when I boil it down, like what is required of us, to have a relationship with God. So what does that look like? And so when I think about that, I go back to the primary needs. We all have them. Does anybody think they don't have one of the four? Like, it's in us, and we're going to break them down. Because when we take our relationship with God and say, everything about me needs to come from you, then I'm walking humbly with God. Acceptance. To know you are loved. How many of y'all know you are loved? Okay, everybody should raise their hand. We know that. Okay, we know that we are loved. But how many of us feel like we're loved every day? There's a little more like, well, maybe today, maybe not, right? Like this is our God. He's calling us to walk in relationship with him, and he wants you to know that you are loved. And you're not loved because you kept his commandments. You're not loved because you haven't sinned. You're not loved for any of those reasons. You're loved because you know he is your God. You're loved because of what Jesus did for us that we could never do for ourselves. We could never pay the price for our sin. I mean, that was God's whole plan. It started with, I want to have a relationship with you through the Old Testament, to then Jesus came to die and give his life and raise his life up so that sin could be defeated, so that we can have a relationship with God. Not have a religion with God, not have a Sunday morning church with God, but have a relationship with God, to where every day you can say, I'm accepted because God accepts me. And I tell my kids this, my middle school friends and my kids, but like, imagine if you knew you were accepted. Done. You're accepted. Now, how much bandwidth do you get back? Because you're not spending all day, do they like me? Did I do a good job on that report? Am I doing okay here at work? Did the kids like what I cooked for dinner tonight? Did I fold their clothes right? Like, I mean, we're constantly looking for something to say, you're accepted, you're loved. And we spend so much of our time on that we can't fathom it. How many of the moms out here, like when you cook dinner, sometimes you're just like, boy, you had better not say a word. You had better eat that plate, right? I mean, like I see it with my wife, and she's like, why don't you have my back? And I was like, well, honestly, Elaine, I mean, I'm like, it was a little rough, you know? And then, and I've learned, I've grown, I've matured, like that was early in the life, of marriage. But yeah, like if you knew you were accepted because of what Jesus did, not because of what you do, you just live in a life that's in a relationship with God where you laugh with him, you cry with him, you share everything with him because he says you're accepted because of what Jesus did, not what you do. That frees up a lot of bandwidth. It allows you to almost discover who you are in his plan for you, because you're not running around here and there chasing everything. And we all fall short, but he paid the price. So acceptance. So just check that off. You're accepted. Know that you're loved. I mean, when I stumbled on this stuff about like 6-7 weeks ago, I listened to chapter 1 like 10 times as Mr. Evans was explaining these 4 primary needs. Because if you've been around me enough, like Chris, man, he is struggling for acceptance. He is struggling for identity. So who are you? Who are you? Like we did this exercise last Wednesday night as we were landing this series, and we were on purpose. And so I gave them like a bubble at the top for small groups, and then I put a bunch of little roles down below in bubbles. And I was like, what's your primary purpose? And we'll get to that. But they were supposed to put in the top like God, because everything about God in their identity overflows into the roles they play. Because if you ask any middle school kid, like, hey man, what's your identity? I'm a mountain biker. Oh, okay. Okay, do you dress like that every day? Yep. Or I'm a dancer, or I ride horses. Like, their identity is wrapped up in what they do, not who they are. But if we look at it this way, identity, to know who you are and how you fit into the story. Because God is crafting this story, and we all play a part in it. And if you walk out of this place today and walk into your workplace tomorrow, knowing that you have acceptance and knowing that you have a place in the story, then you will start living out that story that he is writing on your heart. People are going to notice something different. I challenge my middle school kids. I'm like, walk through the school halls tomorrow, wear whatever you want to wear, and know that you're accepted. Know that you know who you are and how you fit into God's story. Because it changes everything. Adam and Eve, I don't think they were like constantly confused. When they were with God, I think God was pouring into them acceptance, identity. They knew who they were. And the thief knew just the right time to come in and create confusion. And today there is so much confusion on identity. Who are you? Danny led us in a song like, I'm the child of God. That is our identity. And with being a child of God, we have full access to everything that is God. We have full access to everything that Jesus has access to because we're his children. I think about my children, and we're in this big remodel because Ambler left to go to school. And I just had to look at Ambler and say, hey, your identity is not tied up in your room, is it? No? I'm like, because that's not your room anymore. She's like, I understand. We have 3 bedrooms and an attic space. My son has spent most of his life in a room without a window. And now Ambler goes to school. I'm cleaning her room, and I'm like, she would not get her deposit back. I got to work on that. She's going to live off campus next year. I'm like, how do you clean when you leave? And so then I got Samuel. I felt like the proudest dad ever. That was welling up. God was just like, yes, well done. Your son now has a room with a window. Now my 10-year-old Bergen, she does not have a window because she moved into Samuel's room. So it's just this jumbling of their story. Now each child has their own room. And now we're finally working on Karis, my middle child's room. And she was just like, when do we start? When do we start? I'm like, first I got to get Samuel in Ambler's room. Then I got to get Bergen out of your room into Samuel's room. But I got to repaint it because she doesn't want Denver Bronco colors. And so, it's going to take a little time. When do we start? She has Pinterested out. She knows who she is. She wants floating shells on this one long, tall wall. For whatever reason, she wants a library rolling ladder so she can access those shelves. And people are looking at me like, are you going to do that? And I'm like, she's my daughter. I love her creativity. I love her zest. And I love that she can ask me anything. She's the one I took home because she was just like, she's been coughing and she's just so tired and there's no XGT. And she's like, I want to sit and listen, but I'm just so tired. I woke up and then I fell back to sleep and then I didn't know there was no, I'm like, baby, I'll take you home. That's us. That's our identity. We're children of God. How much do we lean in on God and ask him for things? How much do we lean in on God and just say, you give me identity, so therefore I know who I am and I know that you will provide. Security. To know it's going to be okay. How many of us, come on a given week, I'm always like, I don't know if it's going to be okay. I don't know, right? There's so much going on in the world around us. I've got a daughter at Baylor, and I'm like, I don't know if it's going to be okay. I'm trusting in God. It's got to be okay. And I'll tell you this praise. My first monthly payment to Baylor was $2,900. And I'm just like, whoo, that college fund is going to evaporate quick. And I was just like, I know. I'm like, God, let's go. Come on, God, I'm trusting in you. And then my second one was $2,100. I'm not the kind that asks questions, okay? I'm just not that guy. I'm like, oh, it dropped. Yes, God, let's go. My last payment and then my next 2 payments are $900. And then I'm like, Ambler, what's going on? She's like, Dad, I'm just applying for scholarships, things that I hear about, and they just keep giving them to me. And I'm like, all right, you go, God. I'm like, don't stop, Ambler, But I'm like, I just have to trust that it's going to be okay. And I mean, when we drove off, I was in a state of catanic, I was just shock. I was in a coma. My wife thought I was listening to an audible book on my hearing aids, and she's just driving away, and she's like, "What are you listening to?" I'm like, "Nothing." And she's like, "What's going on?" I'm like, "I'm processing." It's my first child going off to college, and I needed to know that it's going to be okay. And then Elaine just looked at me, and she's like, "Listen, I was nervous about Baylor too. It's Texas. It's a long way away." But she's like, "I know that this is where God wants Ambler to go. And so I've got peace." And I'm like, "Give me some of that peace." Because I was just like wrecked. And then I did the smart thing. I started cleaning her room, and I put on this book that I love to listen to by a guy named John Tyson. It's called The Intentional Father, and it just beat me up. I was like, I didn't do enough. I need more time with her. And that's all true. But I'm always looking for security. I'm looking to know it's going to be okay. And there is no other place that I can find that except in the eyes of my Father, God. And his spirit in me, he just looks at me and it's going to be okay. Because it's so easy to get wrapped up in all the stuff that's going on around us to where we forget it's going to be okay. And so when we think about those 4 primary needs, acceptance, I'm loved, I'm accepted, I don't have to work for that. I can just be me. Identity, I know who I am, I'm a child of God, I can ask him for anything. He might say no, but in his provision as a father, he knows what's best, right? And then I can know that it's gonna be okay. I have security. And that is that's just on top of everything. And then we get to this. Boom. Purpose. To know why you are here. Why are we here? Like somebody said, to glorify God. Absolutely. Why are we here? To be in relationship with God. We were created, each one of us was created that we might have a relationship with God. And that's why it was so important that Jesus did what he did on the cross and in the empty tomb, was so that our sin could be paid for so that we can have a relationship with God. To walk humbly with our Father in the cool of the day. To be in relationship. There is so much about our faith. There is so much history in our faith. You open up his word, and he's telling us the story of the Israelites. He's telling us of how he chose his people, how he loved his people. And then he goes into the New Testament where Jesus is here. And then we see that Jesus has a heart for more than just the Israelites, more than just his nation, but he has a heart for the Gentiles, for anybody who would believe. And he says, tell them. And then Silas becomes Paul, because he's like the man who can talk and teach and write and encourage, and he leads, and he starts a movement within the Gentiles. He can go into any city and say, I see that y'all are a very worshipful people, but I have come to give you news of the one true God. And he can say it and not be offended, because God's heart is for all of us to live in relationship with him. And that is our purpose. Now, everybody in this room has a different role, but we all have one purpose. And that's kind of how I was kind of starting to work with my middle school friends. Like, you have a role. You're a mountain biker. You enjoy mountain biking, and you're good at it. You're a dancer. You're a horse rider. You're a student. You're a guy who loves science. You're a big thinker. Those are the roles you play, but your purpose is to live in a relationship with God. Boil it all down. And so then it becomes like, wow, you start looking at the nation Israel and their faith, and how they have Sabbaths, and they take a whole day and they just rest, and they're just with God, because that's their primary role. It's one of their primary needs, is to have purpose in being in a relationship with God. I've done a few Sabbaths. There's this book out there called The Ruthless End of Pursuit of Hurry or something by John Mark Homer. And he's also the awesome guy who's doing the Tuesday night study. What's it called, Ellen? Practicing the Way, right? And I'm like, they wanted me to teach this book at a men's engaged retreat. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, I'm the guy who never slows down. I'm the guy, take a day off, never. But, I've taken a couple of Sabbaths since then. And now I'm tying in like that's my purpose. To be able to stop everything for a day and just be in relationship with God. And it doesn't mean necessarily like, I'm praying 24/7 or I'm journaling. I mean, I'm just being with God. I'm just being me. And I'm resting. And so when you think about like, what is your purpose? We all have roles. But our purpose is to live in relationship with God. That was Adam and Eve's. I mean, God wasn't coming to them and saying, all right, give me the head count on the zebras. Did we lose any? Has there been a rogue lion yet? No. Okay, well, what do you mean? Why do we have so much algae in pond 13 over there? What did we name that pond? I'm like, he didn't come to them with the litany and wanting a report or spreadsheets on how the garden was growing. He came to just be with them, to be in relationship. And I mean, it's like, it's mind-blowing, but we miss it because there is so much going on outside around us. And so when we think about purpose, don't mix it up with your roles. I mean, my purpose cannot be husband, father, employee, youth pastor. Like, that can't be my purpose because there's too many of them. Like, I can be a good husband, but then I'm neglecting my children because they're like, why are you and mom always hanging out? And y'all have popcorn every night. And you kick us out upstairs. And you don't share your popcorn. And y'all watch way too much TV, Because, if all I am is being a perfect husband, then I'm not going to be a perfect father either. So those can't be my purpose. My purpose has to be in relationship with God. Then if you look at it as a chart, like, my purpose is here. Be with God. And he fills me with acceptance. He fills me with identity. He fills me with security. And he is my purpose. And then all of that is just overflowing into the roles I play. It overflows into how do I treat my wife. My sweet Elaine was like, don't you say a word about us, don't you? She's downstairs working. But I'm like, Elaine, it's me. I'm not sweet. And many of y'all have heard me say over and over that that's her one request. Be sweet. Just be sweet. I'm like, I'm not sweet. I wasn't sweet when I dated you. I wasn't sweet when you married me. I'm not a sweet man. Now my son, 3 sisters, and he is just sweet. And there's just this connection between him and my wife. And as I get ready to put him through this program called the Primal Path to lead him into what it means to be a man, I'm like, Elaine, you got to have that talk with Samuel. No. I'm like, no, you do. You have to tell him that you are releasing him to me. You are still his mother, but you can't show him what it means to be a man. I can. And she's like, no, I can't. I'm like, no, baby, you got to, But I'm not sweet. He's sweet. I'm getting sweeter, as I get older and as I start learning this stuff. My acceptance, my identity, my security, and my purpose all come from God. Can't come from anywhere else. And I spent so much of my life just wandering around looking for, thinking I found it, thinking I had it, but I wasn't even close. And so when you boil it back down, you can just put this one down. Go read the book of Micah. It's incredible because it's the story of us, in rebellion, in confusion, doing it our way, and God saying, my judgment's coming, but my love is everlasting. My covenant love for you is deep. It's rich. You will be spared, and I am going to rebuild my relationship with you. And so Micah 6:8, he told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. And so if I was going to leave you anything this week, it would be like, put in your brain, how do you walk humbly with God? We've got a black lab And so I walk now. I never walked. Like if I was outside and I was going somewhere, I was probably running. I kind of looked like Forrest Gump. The black lab's not ready to run, but I walk. And it is like everything slows down. I was talking to Pastor Steve the other day, and he was like, "You want to be sweet?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do." He's like, "Take walks with your wife. Just walk with her, Chris." He's like, "When you walk, everything slows down." He's training for the Austin Marathon. He probably hadn't told you that. And so he's running a lot. But he's like, "But walking's so good, Chris. Walk with Elaine." And so we've done that a few times. And I've been sweet, But I walk a lot more with my dog because he comes everywhere I go. And so, he just looks at me. I'm just grinding away downstairs. I have no window in my basement office. Like, it's perfect. There are no distractions. I can work all day. And he'll come and just put his little head in my lap and whine. I'll be like, "Yeah, it's time. We got to get out of here." But walk humbly with God. Include him in relationship. Start asking these questions. How do I get my acceptance from God? How do I get my identity from God? How do I get my security from God? How do I get my purpose from God? We don't ask questions. And the favorite question that I love is, what if? And so you can put it that way. What if all of my acceptance came from God? What if my complete identity of who I am is who he says I am? What if I did not have to worry about, are all the plates going to fall and make a mess in the kitchen? Because he is my security. And what if my entire purpose in being here was to be in relationship with him? And so walk humbly with your God. So the primary relationship is to walk with God in the cool of day in relationship. And so I challenge y'all to figure that one out. I challenge y'all to just settle in on that, to think about that, and know that there is an avenue to do it. God made a way. His name is Jesus. Right now, many people probably hearing accusatory comments like, "You can't do that. You're not good enough. You did this. You did that." But Jesus made the way for all of us. There is not one accusation that sticks to any of us because of what Jesus Christ did. And I look at my middle school kids, I look at my high school kids, and I'm like, ain't none of y'all as bad as I was. Y'all are awesome. I was terror. Okay? But there's not one accusation that sticks to me because he is my acceptance, my identity, my security, and being in relationship with him is my purpose. And that is going to lead us to having Dan and the crew come back because Dan's going to lead you into communion, but understand communion is this relational aspect with God. He said, "Do this in remembrance of me. Come to my table. Celebrate with one another that you are accepted, that you have identity, that you have security, and you have purpose because of what he did, not because of what you did or what you could ever do." So thank you so much for